the lanes through which the ships can pass is quite narrow.
Okay.
Okay, so the Straits of Hormuz, you're correct. So the Middle East in total produces 30 million barrels a day of oil, and two-thirds of that goes through that strait. Um, if it were to close, it would be a catastrophe.
Welcome to In It to Win It. This is Steve Barton, and thank you for tuning in. Today we have our resident energy expert, Doomberg. In today's discussion, we will talk about breaking developments in Israel and Iran, the Straits of Hormuz, the effect on oil, uranium, coal, and electric vehicles. Doomberg, thank you for coming back on the show.
Steve, great to be back with you. We were joking before we hit record that we scheduled this 6 weeks ago, and the timing couldn't have been better.
It really couldn't have. Yeah, I've been excited over the weekend. I recorded my weekend show, and then right after that, we got the news in Iran, and I'm like, man, that would have been nice to know right before I hit record. But
Yeah.
yeah, pretty incredible. Maybe just start out with your macro thoughts on what's going on over there.
Yeah, look, it's a catastrophe. It is a very sticky situation for the president. We think that what transpired over the weekend was largely theatrical. Trump has done this before with Iran. Um, Oil is not pricing in escalation. Our view is that the West, and Israel is part of the West, cannot afford a protracted missile war against Iran. I think the gamble on Israel's part was an early knockout blow, perhaps even regime change. That didn't happen. I think Iran has surprised in its resiliency. If we view this as the second major front of World War III, which is how we think historians will probably view it, the West in aggregate is dangerously short anti-missile missiles. And the last thing that West NATO needs is, again, a long protracted missile war with the combination of Iran, North Korea, China, and Russia at a time when Russia alone is outproducing NATO by a factor of 4-1. Biggest loser in all this is Ukraine, aside from, of course, the people directly impacted and the civilian casualties that we see. A potential big political loser in this is Trump. His base is fractured and highly divided on the issue. One hopes that the weekend's activities were the beginning of a de-escalation that leads to a ceasefire where both sides can claim victory and negotiations resume, although it's difficult to imagine how negotiations can be successful in the aftermath of what has just transpired. But that's what the markets are telling us. Even as you hit record, there's talk of a potential missile strike on a U.S. military base in Iraq, and oil tanked on the news, which means the market is kind of seeing through this theater. Perhaps this is the limited counterstrike that Iran will be allowed, and then everybody says, détente, cessation of violence, and back to negotiating. So that's certainly what gold and oil and stocks are telling us right now.
Yeah, so you see that basically this could be the beginnings of World War III, but the West doesn't have the stomach or the missiles or the anti-missiles to handle it.
Yeah, look, I mean, this is what sort of surprised us at the attack in the first place. The Secretary Rubio was in Congress at the end of May saying that it couldn't keep up with Ukrainian demand for anti-missile armaments because the U.S. just doesn't produce them fast enough. And this entire war in Ukraine and now the escalation of violence, of war in the Middle East, let's call it what it is, has exposed just how dependent U.S. military supply chains are on China, and China's on the other side of both conflicts. China has military assets in the Middle East as we speak, undoubtedly helping Iran. Israel is a small country with sophisticated but limited air defense systems that seem to be being penetrated with regularity, which is why we thought there would be no war, and we were wrong. But, today's the 11th day, 10th day of this. No signs of regime change in Iran, no sign of a popular uprising. And every day, perhaps at a low grade, both sides exchanging missiles. It's hard to tell what's going on because both Israel and Iraq have cracked down severely on information and video and photographic evidence coming out of the countries. But from what we can tell, Iranian missiles are getting in and doing damage, and so too, it must be said, are Israel's. But that speaks to an attrition type war, which Israel just can't win. And so when you read carefully the way Trump claimed total victory, which of course was silly, and unrealistic on Saturday. But even Benjamin Netanyahu's carefully crafted statements are beginning to prep the Western populations for a ceasefire and a claim of victory, however unrealistic such claims are. And then, the news cycle will move on, and all the Fox News viewers will be bitterly disappointed because, they can't get to talk about war anymore.
All right, I'm going to share my screen here and kind of emphasize what you're talking about. So here's Iran here taking up most of the map. Here's Israel way over here. Now, I think Iran, if I'm not mistaken, has 90 or 100 million people. If this evolved into an all-out troops on the ground kind of thing, Israel doesn't stand a chance, correct?
Well, there aren't going to be troops on the ground. There's 3 aircraft carriers in the region, or 2 and 1 heading there. That's not enough to do significant. I mean, you could do a lot of damage, but if nuclear weapons are off the table, there's only so much you can do in an air war. Unlike, say, with Iraq, where hundreds of thousands of troops were amassed, in the region, and the coalition partners and so on, none of that is there today. The U.S. certainly has soldiers in the area, but not nearly enough to do anything meaningful on the ground. So if it's truly just a missile war, it's a missile war of attrition. And as we wrote in a piece last October called October Surprise, Israel is vulnerable. It has 5 power plants that produce 85% of its electricity. It has 5 desalination plants that produce most of its water, or majority of its water. It has 2 natural gas fields in the Mediterranean that supply its energy needs. That's a dozen targets. And if Iran is in possession of several thousand more missiles, at least some of which have precision targeting capabilities, and if Israel's air defense system, while still effective, is not perfectly so, it can be overwhelmed, then the strategic targeting of those dozen sites could make life very challenging for civilians in Israel. By the way, that would be a war crime, but who cares what war crimes are anymore, I suppose. Nobody bothers with the United Nations Security Council or using Congress to declare war, or such silly concepts of the past. But, the wanton destruction of largely civilian energy infrastructure has been normalized. We've been warning about this. And so the concerns about the Strait of Hormuz and so on are all real. But the market right now, again, this is all what ifs. The market is not pricing any of this in. There's always a chance that the market is wrong, and some people will make a lot of money and others will lose it. But as we speak, these are just hypotheticals. But a long-term missile war of attrition is in the strategic interest, actually, of Russia and China, in a way. As long as it doesn't escalate, it's in nobody's strategic interest that things escalate to, say, tactical nuclear weapons or the Samson option if you're Israel. But this is where we are today.
Okay, so tactically speaking, there's about a dozen targets here that could really put a hurt on Israel. Things like desalination plants and power plants. And
hard to live in the desert with no electricity and no drinking water.
Yeah. Okay. You mentioned the Strait of Hormuz. So that is, I'm going to zoom in right here. Right here. Now, this is, I believe, about 100 or 120 miles wide. I think 1 out of 5 barrels of oil that crosses around the planet goes through here. What maybe emphasize the significance of this and what could happen in this region?
At its smallest, I believe it's even, the lanes through which the ships can pass is quite narrow. Okay. So the Straits of Hormuz, you're correct. So the Middle East in total produces 30 million barrels a day of oil, and 2/3 of that goes through that strait. If it were to close, it would be a catastrophe. We're publishing on this tomorrow, called Strait Shooting, where we walk through some counterintuitive potential second and third order medium to long-term impacts of a closure, which we can get into. But for the purposes of this sort of broad answer, there's another really important thing that jumps out at you when you look at this map, which is Qatar. And Qatar is one of the largest exporters of LNG. And as we say in the piece, Qatar is on the wrong side of that strait. And so 20% of global LNG would also be shut in the event that this were to close. We don't think it's going to close. There's significant military assets in the area that would be working hard to keep it open. Now, if credible threats are made and missiles are fired at tankers or LNG carriers, you could see the insurance companies refusing to underwrite passage, which would be a big problem. So you don't actually have to physically, insurance, seaborne vessels, it's difficult to get insurance to sail through war zones.
Yeah.
Which is why, everyone's avoiding the Houthis in the Red Sea and sailing the long route. And so it's a dangerous thing. I think it's in everybody's interests, especially China's, that this stay open. And since China is going to be close to and supplying arms to and giving military intelligence to Iran, that would be a tactic of last resort from the Iranians, because the Chinese would be the second most damaged region as a consequence, region or country as a consequence, the first being Europe by a wide margin, which we can get into. But we've studied this, unlikely to happen. If it did, all bets are off. You could see all manner of weird things, again, which I'm happy to discuss depending on which direction you want to go.
Okay, so this region produces 30 million barrels a day, which 2/3 of it goes right through here. Qatar has 20% of liquefied natural gas for the flows right out there through the planet. Let's say this did get shut down. At that point, do you just got to put this on trains, or how do you get it out?
No, it gets stuck. So the first thing that would happen, let's walk through some of our predictions in the piece tomorrow.
Okay.
So right now, everyone assumes there's like sort of a global price of oil, but there isn't. There's different contracts for oil, different grades of oil, and they trade in different regions and different places. They trade generally pretty tightly today. We think that's the first casualty of a closure of the strait. You would see the spread between WTI, which is basically US oil, and Brent crude, which is European oil, would explode. Brent would trade for much higher than WTI. Why? Because we think Trump would implement export controls. There's no scenario where the global price of gasoline or diesel is going to be paid by US consumers, and Trump is just going to do nothing about it. Don't forget, the US only lifted its oil export ban in 2015, I believe it was, under President Obama. That you would see what Russia does today. So Russia has two prices. It allows its refiners to export only after it meets domestic demand at what amounts to fixed prices. You would see the same thing in the US, and the region of the world that would be most jeopardized by this would be Europe. And we've been flagging this for a long time, but let me give you some numbers just to contextualize it for you. Europe consumes 40 exajoules of hydrocarbons a year, mostly oil and natural gas, although some coal as well. But it only produces 6 exajoules of hydrocarbons. So the other 34 exajoules have to be imported from abroad. A lot of it comes from the Middle East. A lot of it passes through that strait. And in a world where it's every country or region for themselves, Europe is in the hurt locker. We think that the European Union itself might collapse. You're already seeing periphery countries balking at restrictions of cheap Russian natural gas. Brussels would be very unpopular in a world where its insane energy policies have left the country basically naked. And so that is the biggest loser in all of this. China would be a substantial loser, although it has spread its risk. It is short oil substantially. It does import some from Iran, but a lot of it comes from other countries that also must pass through the straits. But it has built out so much refining capacity that it has made itself irreplaceable in the global market for refined products. And if China's refineries are starved of its crude, the rest of the world is going to be starved of diesel and gasoline in a big way. Again, the U.S. would limit exports until the domestic demand is met. You'd see a bifurcation of prices all over the world. You'd see all kinds of crazy things. The last thing we would say in the medium to long term is the significance of that strait would very rapidly dissipate as midstreamers would get in there and build all manner of workarounds and pipelines that don't exist today to ensure that the world never has to face such a risk again. It wouldn't take much in the way of pipelines. You could see, they might even, dig a canal or two if they have to, but pennies don't hold up dollars indefinitely. Super spikes in commodities always lead to gluts, and that would be the same here. We wouldn't trade trying to guess the timing or the consequences of a strait. If the straits were closed and oil prices exploded, we'd be waiting to fade that with out of the money puts, because within 6 to 9 months, the price of oil would crash again.
Yeah. Okay. Well, how would you even play that on Exxon or something? Or
You could just play USO if you wanted to.
yeah. Okay. Okay. All right. So basically, we'd see a real arbitrage between WTI and Brent, because WTI is primarily America and Canada, and Brent is kind of the rest of the world. So this would fall under the Brent category. Europe would be in a hurt locker because they consume about 40 exajoules of
Hydrocarbons. Yeah.
of hydrocarbons of demand. However, they only produce 6. So that leaves 34 on the table, which is
Yeah.
almost all of it.
Let me
They
let
got
me
to import.
let me contextualize that for you. That is roughly the equivalent of the U.S.'s entire natural gas production.
Oh, wow.
I believe the U.S. natural gas production was 37 exajoules in 2023. The new statistical review of world energy drops this Friday, which is a holiday here in the Doomberg office. We can't wait. But the latest numbers we have, it's rough equivalent, 100 BCF per day of natural gas is imported to Europe on an energy content basis, mostly, oil and refined products and in natural gas. And so they would be, well, the importance of being fully back integrated into these core energy commodities would be laid bare. The two countries that are best positioned, well, 3 countries, but Russia, Canada, and the U.S., North America as a whole would be fine. But Russia is fully back integrated in all the commodities and foodstuffs and fertilizer that it needs. To the extent that Russia would help China, we suspect, of course, they would. Such a closure might accelerate the Power Siberia 2 project. It would certainly accelerate global LNG projects. As Nassim Taleb said, not all gluts are followed by shortages, but all shortages are followed by gluts.
Okay. Okay. China would be in a bit of a hurt locker for a moment, but they have so much refining capacity. So would the rest of the planet. So
Yeah.
as far as everything weighs out, they would probably make out okay.
But they get 60% of their energy from coal. They're working to electrify their vehicle base, especially in the cities. They are building out nuclear reactors. They are working diligently to minimize the one glaring risk. But yes, they would be damaged in the short term by this for sure. Sorry.
Okay. Okay. The U.S. would limit its exports, and that makes sense. Like, why transport stuff out of the country if you can't fulfill your needs at home? So we'd fulfill our needs at home, and then any little extra that came about, we'd export, and so would Russia. Yeah, this could be a global shakeup if that strait got closed. Now, I'm going to share my screen here, and I've been watching this like a hawk. You alluded to it. So this is WTI. Right now we're sitting at 71, and here's Brent. And I've been waiting to see if there's going to be a spread here. So my logic was simply what you were talking about, was if all of a sudden Brent goes up to 85 and WTI stays here at 71, then something's going on in the Middle East. Probably before this will probably be our first sign, right?
Yeah, that's one of our leading indicators for sure. The other is not to get too technical, but 5.6 times the price of LNG landed in the Dutch TTF is basically the energy equivalent price of Brent crude, and those two are still trading in lockstep with each other. When you see these correlations stay tight in a market that is largely physically well supplied, it tells you that we're not in a crisis. Let me give you a couple of examples of really weird stuff that we saw during the European energy crisis of late 2021 into 2022.
Okay.
You saw LNG trade for $600 a barrel oil intraday. Crazy, out of whack. We saw coking coal trading cheaper than thermal coal, which as far back as our Bloomberg goes had never happened before. You saw all kinds of just crazy correlations get out of whack. And when correlations get out of whack, that's basically a sign of a crisis. And so as you and I are recording this, and I'll just pull up my screen, the Dutch TTF contract is trading for $13.70. You multiply that by 5.6, and you get roughly the price of Brent. And so since those things are basically fungible, they should trade on an energy equivalent basis. And if we see them get out of whack, something is going on. And so this is one of the things that investors should keep on their dashboard to get a sense of where the markets are. Now, look, if you looked at that chart, show me on the chart where World War III entered its second phase in the Middle East. The markets have basically yawned this thing. I mean, there is some geopolitical price premium for sure. Our equilibrium price of oil is $55 a barrel. So there's probably $20 a barrel of geopolitical price risk. Not inconsequential, but nowhere near where we think, or the consensus view on where oil would trade if the closure of the Strait was a real possibility. I think this is pricing in false flag risk, terrorism risk, all the things that could happen that might inflame, but not really the base case of protracted war. I mean, right there on your screen, we'd have told you on Friday that Trump was going to launch a devastating blow on Iran's nuclear facilities, and oil would be down 4% on Monday. That's those two things. One of those two things is wrong.
Yes, yes. I'm shocked that oil's down today. I was like, I have over the weekend, I was like, I have a hard time
So
envisioning that
we're
oil's going to be down. But
we're not, like, seconds after we saw the headlines hit, I took to Substack's version of Twitter notes and posted, "This all seems ... theatrical, I believe, or performative is the word that I used."
yeah,
And
yeah.
if you would have pressed me, if I was, running an advisory business, advising investors, and they would have put a gun to my head and said, "Is oil going to be up or down on Monday?" On Saturday night, I would have said down, because the claimed success was so outrageously impossible that it could only mean that Trump wanted to declare victory and go home. And the markets are pricing the go home part and ignoring the declaring victory part.
Okay, okay. All right. Moving on to the attacks here. So this is kind of a little map here of the three sites. So we got Fordo, Natanz, and if Sahan. I'm probably butchering those names. These are the three sites that were missiled, right? That had the airstrikes.
So we're told.
Okay, all right. Yeah, that was my next question. Is that accurate?
Look, I honestly, in the modern era, what do you believe?
Yeah,
If you again, if you we try to read everybody's propaganda,
yeah.
and we think it gives us an edge in our analysis, and but doing so makes it almost impossible to watch Western television or to read Western legacy media because it's so disconnected from reality and so transparently propaganda that it makes one wonder about everything you've ever been told on any issue. Um, there's no hesitation in relying on sources said to then repeat what everybody must know is a lie. And so we weren't there. We don't know what happened. Certainly, we were joking internally. This whole theater was capped with a press conference from a former Fox and Friends weekend anchor. I mean, you couldn't make it up. And so you have the former host of The Apprentice and a Fox and Friends weekend anchor filling in the world on World War III. It's bizarre. So yes, allegedly, we have no evidence otherwise. Those are the three. Let's do how the legacy media would do it. Sources tell us those are the three sites that were attacked.
Okay, okay. All right. Have you found anything that would suggest that they were enriching uranium there? That maybe after the strikes, there's any nuclear fallout? Have you seen anything on that? Anything credible?
No, the relevant international nuclear authorities claim there's no unusual radioactivity. Um, you know, this is not going to slow proliferation.
Okay.
One of our early objections to this war is the objectives of the war um, are unattainable and are almost certain to backfire. We like to say that wars are much easier to start than to win or to get out of. This one is no different. Do you think that Iran is more likely to want a bomb or less likely to want a bomb as a consequence of the last 2 weeks?
Oh, way more likely to
Do
want
you
one.
think any country that is seriously considering developing their own is more or less motivated as a consequence of the last 2 weeks? I mean, it this the headline reason for going to war is unachievable and will only exacerbate it in the same way that sanctioning Russia was going to backfire and has backfired. We have a pretty decent track record in calling these things early, despite the controversy that comes with doing so, and sticking to our guns, and losing subscribers and picking up others, and then ultimately being proven right. I'm old enough to remember when we wrote crazy pills all the way back in 2022, claiming correctly in hindsight that the sanctions against Russia would not only fail, they would backfire. And the heat we got for saying that early when it wasn't clear how it would turn out, and the calls of us being Putin puppets and all of that stuff. In this business, there's advocacy and there's analysis, and we try really hard to be analysts. And when you're trapped in a cycle of advocacy, you tend to get angry at things that are inconsistent with your worldview. It is a fascinating thing, just as an aside. Like, we write our stuff politely, we hold our views authentically, and we show our homework. Like, we link to everything, and when we're wrong, we admit it, and we try to understand why. And I don't remember the last time that I read a piece of analysis authentically expressed, politely expressed, with the homework shown, and I got angry. Like, okay, like Steve Barton's opinion is A, B, C, and D. I might think you're wrong. I might think you're stupid, but you're not going to make me angry. I don't get it. Like, people are so trapped in their own propaganda loops that anything they see that disagrees with their worldview is an assault on them. But such is life. That's the nature of being in this business. The only thing worse than being wrong in this business is having no opinion. And our subscribers expect our view, and they can discount it based on our track record and our own biases.
Okay. Um, Sticking with oil here, getting into some listener questions here. Lazar wants to know if you still see $40 oil on the horizon.
Well, if the straits were closed, the time to $40 oil would accelerate, for sure. Um, our equilibrium price is $55 a barrel. I don't recall claiming that $40 a barrel was on the horizon, although it's certainly possible. We arrive at that equilibrium price by assuming that at $10 per million BTU, everybody in the LNG supply chain can make money. Landed LNG at $10 a barrel, $10 a million BTU is the equivalent of $56 a barrel Brent, and so we just say 55 is our equilibrium price. That means natural gas drillers in Appalachia and the Permian can make money, and LNG exporters can make money, and the cargo ships can make money. And so our equilibrium price is $10 a million BTU natural gas, which we believe, because of the co-production of gas and oil in places like the Permian, these things are now linked. And so $55 is our equilibrium price. It can go below that, and it clearly trades above that because oil is a managed market. So yeah, that's our view. If peace were to break out tomorrow, I think you'd knock $15 a barrel off the price of oil. Perhaps with oil now below 71 as we're talking, that's already being sort of worked into markets. So if you assume the peak war price was 78, I believe on Friday, you could see 63, 64 again, which would bring us right back to where this whole affair started.
Okay. Have you noticed, Derek's wondering if you've noticed a link or correlation between the Bloomberg Commodity Index and oil?
I mean, not something we've studied specifically or carefully. That commodity index is a mix of many commodities, I believe, right? And oil is but one of them. Broadly, again, we annoy some commodity investors when we say this, the long-term real value of commodities is always lower because the commodity producers are deflationary machines. So the best way to visualize this is just to plot the number of ounces of gold it takes to buy a barrel of oil or some natural gas or some corn or some soybeans, and plot it over 40 years. And you could see in real money the true price of all commodities goes down. Investors in commodities get sucked in because they're inelastic and they occasionally have these super spikes. And it's kind of like, betting on vol. Sometimes you win big, but most of the times, you're dissipating away option premium, so to speak, and you're losing. If you want to invest in commodities, just buy gold. That's our view.
Okay. All right. If you want to invest in commodities, bet on gold. We have a lot of gold bugs here. Okay. Stewart's asking about California's refineries. He says, will California's diminishing numbers of refineries cause refined product shortages in California? And if
It's
so,
inevitable, absolutely inevitable. We've written about this several times. California is actually two gasoline islands. Northern and Southern California aren't even connected by pipeline. They're running out all the refiners from the state. On top of that, they have special grades that are unique to California that most other refiners don't want to make. It's a pain. And so, yeah, it is almost inevitable. California is an energy crisis waiting to happen. You're going to see state takeover of refiners, which will, I'm sure, to help. By the way, one of the largest remaining refiners in San Francisco sits on the Hayward Fault, which is long overdue for a major earthquake. I mean, yes, when it happens, we will be able to say that Gavin Newsom can't say that he wasn't told.
okay. So, yes, it's coming. If you had to put a timetable on it, what would be your guess?
I mean, they are one accident away from a catastrophe. They have like 2 weeks worth of supply. They would have to rely on imports in a time where the Strait of Hormuz may be closed, right? And the custom grades for gasoline that California demands takes time and requires separate runs. And so if you have a major refinery fire, by the way, California doesn't let these refiners make any money. They tax all their profits and they regulate them into oblivion, makes it almost impossible to make any money in this industry, which means maintenance is probably skipped. Any prolonged maintenance turnaround, I think they're down to 5 or 6 major refiners, 3 in each of their little islands. One goes down and you have a real catastrophe. Refinery fires happen. Like, it's a dangerous business to take oil and to boil it. So yeah, I couldn't tell. It could happen tomorrow.
Okay. It's like trying to guess when the next earthquake's going to happen.
Yeah, look, if the Hayward Fault erupts, and I think it's 18 years overdue, that would be a catastrophe for sure.
Okay. Thank you, Gavin Newsom. All right. Gold. JJ, macro thoughts on gold.
Yeah, we're putting together a presentation for our Pro Tier this month, actually called Goldileo, the yellow rock at the center of our financial universe, where we're going to put a 50-slide presentation together. There's a lot of gold bugs, as you mentioned, and there's a lot of content that is focused on gold. We're not sort of in that clickbaity hyperbole space, but gold is not money today. There is no money today. We have currencies today, but we do not have money today. No instrument satisfies the 3 requirements of money, which is, of course, medium of exchange, unit of account, and store of value. All fiat currencies fail the 3rd test. Gold is not widely accepted except in limited barter. And so there is no money today, but there is currencies. There are currencies. And then there is gold, and gold is a true store of value. So what do you do with a store of value? Well, you accumulate it when you want to save. So our personal view is that there is no price of gold. There is the price of the US dollar in ounces of gold. And 20 American Eagles will buy you a nice mid-size SUV today. 20 American Eagles will buy you a nice mid-size SUV in 10 years. That's the purpose of gold. And so we earn money in fiat. We live in the fiat system. We transact in fiat currencies because that's the only way to live. We save by buying gold or other real assets like land and collectibles. And then we invest privately where we can affect the outcome. That is our philosophy. So within our savings objectives, gold has a prominent but not a dominant allocation for sure. And that's gold's role. And the gold eagles I have in my safe, if I give them to my children someday, they'll be worth whatever 20 gold eagles buys you today. And that's gold's role. And I think you need to understand that gold is not an investment vehicle. There's lots of people who like to speculate in gold. And that is the worldview that assumes the dollar is the center of the financial universe. It is not, in our view. All fiat currencies have failed. The US dollar is in the process of failing. It has really failed if you just measure the purchasing power of a 1970s US dollar compared to today, when the gold window was closed by Nixon. Nobody would argue that the dollar is money. The US dollar is currency, the most important currency in the world, but it's not money.
Okay. They're medium of exchange, a unit of account, and a store of value. Currencies are not.
Correct.
Gold is.
Correct. But gold is not a medium of exchange. Like, let's be honest with ourselves. Neither is Bitcoin. There is no money in the world today. There are currencies and there are stores of value like gold.
Yeah, yeah. I'm not going to go to Starbucks and get a coffee with a sliver of gold.
Correct.
It's just not a medium of exchange, but it is a great way to store your wealth and pass it on to your children.
Yeah, and in that presentation, by the way, which we'll send a preview to our paid subscribers and then hopefully convince some of them to upgrade to our pro tier and get our monthly webinars. We also talk about why gold miners are hated and, the rise of BRICS and the demise of the US dollar system and all the standard things that gold bugs will know, but our view on it and our spin on it.
Okay. Do you follow Equinox Gold? He's also asking about them.
Yeah, no, we don't follow specific. We're not a single stock shop here.
Okay.
We are energy, geopolitics, and finance.
Okay. All right. And moving on to uranium. Derek is asking about, he says, are there really going to be 3 SMRs built in the next 12 months as advertised? I think he's talking about the US.
Yeah, we're bullish nuclear reactor build-outs. We'd like to say that the commodity producers get to build stuff during Republican administrations and they get to make money during Democratic administrations. The global nuclear renaissance is real. What that means for uranium equities or uranium the commodity are two separate questions, of course. We would be bullish any company like sort of the midstream analogies that are necessary to facilitate the volume of construction that's coming. We would be wary of being long the commodity directly for the reasons that we have already articulated, because the long-term price of all commodities, including uranium, is lower. I remember being on a podcast with Justin from Uranium Insider when uranium was at 108, and my good friend Tony Greer, who I think was telling people in his Slack channel that if you're not selling into strength, when do you sell? It had gone from 30 to 108, and now it's sort of consolidating, and we're seeing a little bit of a rise now on these announcements. But we tend to stay away from directly investing in the commodities. But if you're interested in equities that facilitate volume, we would be more interested in exploring those.
Okay. Sam, piggybacking on uranium, he says, thank you, Stephen Doomberg. I love the show. Thank you, Sam, for being here. Does a world in which nuclear war seem more likely make uranium a safer investment or a more risky investment?
Nuclear war doesn't make any investment less risky in our view because it's kind of binary. There is danger that a nuclear facility is attacked and causes a radiation release, and we get the hyperventilating overreaction cycle that happened after the tsunami and Fukushima, the most overhyped industrial accident in the history of the world. Precisely one person is known to have died as a consequence of that. Certainly a tragedy for that one person, but in the 70s, a giant dam in China collapsed and up to 250,000 people were killed, and we don't go around the world dismantling hydroelectricity dams. Life is it's nothing but a series of trade-offs. And, the risk associated with nuclear technology is so wildly disproportionate to the benefits, wildly exaggerated, certainly compared to the benefits. But it is what it is. That's the life we live in. We have to be analysts and not advocates. And a major attack on a nuclear facility in Ukraine, or a false flag, or an attack on a true attack on nuclear facilities in Iran that leads to significant radiation leak would certainly be bearish for the uranium trade and for the nuclear trade in general.
Okay. All right. Any attack that would in any way resemble, or I'm sorry, anything that would any way resemble Fukushima or a like accident would be terrible. If there actually is a nuclear war, probably not going to matter what you're invested in.
Yeah,
Okay. Um, Rusty's asking about the chances that the USA builds a can-do reactor. Are you familiar with those?
sure. Yeah, CANDU is the Canadian technology. Odds are very, very low. Westinghouse, powerful, lots of connections to the US government. I think they should. I think it's great technology. A lot of attributes about it. Canada should be building out a lot more too. They need not be messing around with new technologies. That's the thing about nuclear. It actually requires no technological advances to be an amazing input into, global standards of living. Um, the chasing of fusion is just a canard. It solves fake problems. If aliens descended, they would be puzzled by the fact that we don't power all of our civilization from fission. Um, is what it is for a variety of political and economic reasons. We don't, but we could, and we should.
I think they'd be laughing about a lot of things, like why we're trying to power it with solar and where the sun doesn't shine and it snows all the time.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Okay, let's move on to coal. Saab is wanting to know, he says, do you see the widening gap between power supply and demand forcing politicians to restart recently shut down coal plants?
Possible in the US. More likely that plants that have been scheduled to close get a new lease on life. We are waiting for the EPA's new carbon rules and carbon views to be rolled out, which will be very controversial and the subject of many Doomberg pieces for sure. Um, Unlikely to happen in Europe, although it should. China is building them out at record pace and more than happy to stockpile as much coal as it needs. Back to our questions about China being hurt, it'd certainly be hurt if the strait were closed, but it has planned for such things. Um, the global south is going to continue to burn ever more coal. And again, when the new version of the Statistical Review of World Energy is released this week, we suspect we'll see record production and consumption in 2024, despite trillions of dollars being wasted on renewable fantasies.
Okay.
Doesn't make coal an investable commodity, though, just to be clear.
Okay. All right. So it's possible in the United States. You're kind of waiting on the EPA to come out with their new carbon legislature. You see it unlikely in Europe, and the global south is going to continue to burn more and more coal every year.
Yeah, so to be clear on that EPA comment, there's rumors and speculation that the EPA will declare that CO2 is not a pollutant.
Really?
Yeah, that's coming.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Why the sudden change of mind by them?
Because we had a sudden change in president.
Ah, okay. Okay.
Yeah, this is Trump's EPA. It'll be litigated. It'll be, you know, Congress will maybe weigh in on the issue. Who knows? But that's coming. Yeah.
Okay.
You heard it here first.
Okay. Heard it first here on In It to Win It from Doomberg. I like that. All righty. But you don't see it as an investable thesis. So we're swimming.
Well, I
in
mean, yeah, coal's $107 a ton right now. China's producing more than it consumes and still importing. There's a glut of it. This is China's battery, basically. After the energy crisis in Europe, it decided that it was just going to produce and stockpile an enormous amount of coal. It has done so. You know, your one great rain season is just one province away from a collapse in coal prices because hydroelectricity in China is swinging with coal all the time. So, you know, the markets are well supplied. We probably won't see a repeat of coal prices going haywire if the Strait of Hormuz is closed because it's a separate market and there's just so much of it. And, you know, it would certainly be bullish for coal in the short term. But, you know, if you want to get long a producer who has low cost, you know, whose stock is down because the market hates them, that's your own issue. But the commodity itself, again, we very few commodities that we would invest in and usually would be on the short side after a super spike.
Okay. All righty. EVs and hybrids. Rusty wants to know, what's your take on the price war in the Chinese auto industry?
Yeah, the Chinese are dominating EV technology top to bottom. BYD is a powerhouse of technology, which is why Warren Buffett is an investor. The current price of Tesla baffles us. No American producer is going to be able to compete with the Chinese automakers, especially the plug-in hybrids. The main automakers in the West, both the US and German, and obviously the Japanese automakers, are capitalized for global production. But, BYD has a beautiful car that can go, 2,000 kilometers for $14,000, right? You just can't compete with that. The UAW won't allow American manufacturers to compete with that. And so if you're looking at a $10,000 car that costs $25,000 to make in the US, there's only so much tariffs can do to protect you, because GM and Ford and Chrysler and Volkswagen and Toyota and Honda, and, they're all capitalized to compete on a global scale. And China's going to eat their lunch. We've seen this movie before. So that's our view of the price war in China. But the price war in China is only going to make the Chinese manufacturers all the more competitive. So,
Yeah. Okay. All right. So China is absolutely dominating the EV and plug-in hybrid market.
the automobile market,
Oh,
yeah,
everything.
right. They are currently focused inwardly on hybrids and BEVs because of China's chronic lack of crude capacity. Um, that doesn't mean they couldn't make regular cars with the same factories, right? I mean, stamp and steel is stamp and steel, Steve. And tires and wheels and technology and self-driving and, quick battery recharge, and all the things that, have been wildly overvalued in the Western markets. I mean, China's eating their lunch across all those dimensions. We'll know that the U.S. stock market is no longer frothy when the market cap of BYD exceeds that of Tesla.
Okay. Yeah. 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 I wonder why Tesla is their stock hasn't completely collapsed yet, but I guess right now we're just kind of keeping BYDs out of America, right? And
Yeah, well, there's only so many countries that want to keep the world's best cars out of their countries for the lowest price. And, yeah,
well put.
yeah.
Well put. Okay, kind of a miscellaneous question here from Andrea. How will developments in robotics, AI, and quantum computing affect future wars? Could quantum computing become the new A bomb?
Yeah, war is always a racket. When you're in the bomb-making business, peace is a working capital problem. Um, AI will certainly affect war. Um, Robotics will affect war, but when it comes down to it, like, what are we going to be, some, Roman Colosseum watching each other's robots go at it? I don't know. There's a hope that the development of technology and AI and, quantum computing will make wars a relic of the past. Instead of using those tools to make it easier to conduct war, perhaps we could leverage those tools to make it easier and funner to live. But, we're pacifist isolationists, we need classic liberals over here.
Okay, all right. So I guess in short, not that you see.
Well, it's certainly going to affect war. I mean, the drone war is an example of that. But this is the direction of travel.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. All right. Is there anything that I should have asked that I didn't? Any thoughts you kind of want to get out to everyone?
No, I think we've covered an awful lot in the hour. Again, just let's hope for peace and don't go long commodities.
All right. As time goes on, commodities get cheaper and cheaper.
In real terms, yes, not in nominal terms necessarily, but in real terms for sure.
Okay. Okay. Awesome. Doomberg, thank you for coming on the show. If viewers want to get a hold of you and follow your work, how can they do so?
Yeah, everything is at Doomberg.com. Our annual subscription gets you our roughly 7 to 9 articles a month. Our pro tier gets you that plus our monthly webinars, which are about 45 minutes to an hour long presentations, fixed presentations that we record and send out to that tier, and a few other services as well, like more direct access to the team. All of our podcast appearances like this. We have stealthily opened a more expansive merchandise store. We haven't really gone live yet, like by telling all of our subscribers, but Doomberg.myshopify.com if you're interested in getting a Yeti mug or a Doomberg hat or a Doomberg t-shirt. That's more just, brand and marketing stuff. But our primary product is our articles. We put a lot of thought in them. We publish, we research, write, edit, publish, and promote a piece roughly every 4 days. And, it's the work of my life. It's the work of our lives. And we certainly enjoy doing it. So, Steve, it's always great to come back. Hopefully next time we come back, there'll be far less to talk about.
I hope the next time we speak, oil is $55 a barrel.
Sold.
Doomberg, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thanks, Steve.
And thank you for tuning in. Go to stevebartonmoney.com for more and have a wonderful day.